Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have two of my good brothers here in the temple. In fact, both of them are involved in the Valley of the Judged in various forms. In the red corner, currently going through Shattered with me on Thursdays, good brother Monarch.
How many forms are there to Valley of the Judged exactly?
2.
As many as I need them to be. And, of course, the man of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zadari Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence, good brother Xanatrix.
Zadari Enterprises is enacting a community outreach program this week. If you come to Bring Your Kid to Work Day, we will give them a free pet. This pet is known by the scientific name Therafosa blondie. You'll like it. Trust me.
Now, I would like to state, for the record, here at the Storm and Illuminations, we possess 1,001 runes.
No, you don't.
We have Ammon, Armbar. Some runes start with B, I don't know.
Those aren't
But they are
runes,
there.
those are wrestling moves.
I don't think Ammon's a wrestling move.
I know what you're trying to do, and you kind of undid your own damn joke. So
I'm still sticking with the Armbar. It's totally a rune.
4, hold 1, arm drag. Hold 2, arm bar. Hold 3, chicken wing. Hold 4, arm bar.
And the one demonstrating them all is the murder grandpa.
Which usually means even grown-ass men are going to be screaming like a little girl in about 5 minutes.
Also, hello,
less.
Dreadlore.
Mm-hmm.
What's up, guys?
I see Dreadlore in the chat. I see Enemy Crab in the chat. Welcome to the party. If you are somebody who is of the opinion that the discrepancy in certain fantasy RPGs is perfectly fine and has no problems whatsoever,
You're gonna hate us tonight.
to which I say, take a number, sit the fuck down, and get in line.
The line's at this point, if I had to measure the line, it's probably a few astronomical units long.
It's about as... Do you remember the city from Blame?
Yes.
About that
Yes,
big.
I do. That's a very big city.
Yes, it is.
Very beautiful city too, but only in the manga, really.
Yeah, don't watch the anime version of it. That is, I maintain that Blame is not something that is conducive to animation.
Well, it would only be conducive if they could keep up the level of detail, and that's not conducive to creating a weekly anime in the first place. We saw that being a problem with a lot of the early Berserk stuff, and it's also part of the problem with Berserk 2016, trying to retain detail while trying to use shortcuts at the same time.
Yeah. Truth be told, we could say that with a lot of seinen stuff, because a lot of seinen manga is very detailed. But that's Rails.
Indeed.
We may tackle that one of these days. But we here have a great love for games and game design, and I think all of us in one form or another have chafed under a certain narrative. This narrative being that there is nothing wrong with having your spellcasters, whether it be in video games, role-playing games, or just standard fiction that is not interactive at all, be such a power scale tier above everyone else that they are an entire party's worth of usefulness all to themselves.
this is what spawned the trope linear warriors, quadratic mages.
And I know that trope has been around for a while, and some people may not be aware of it. But the best way to describe it is martial archetypes seem to develop on a linear pathway, i.e., X+1.
Yep, X+1 all the way up to the top of their power level.
Mm-hmm. Whereas magic-based or spellcasters, whatever equivalent to spellcasting you want to go with, because I'm including psychics in some space opera games. Yes, that's just magic in another coat of paint. Deal with it. Is the idea that those go up exponentially, where it might be a bit scrawny early on, but then later on they're able to solve entire encounters by themselves.
I would argue that even in some forms, mages aren't exponential or quadratic, they're logarithmic.
Mm-mm.
And anyone who's done log tables, you know how fucking out of pocket that gets real fast.
Yes. It's the reason I don't do that these days.
Oh, hey. Zero's here. Hey, Zero. So's Cress. How you doing, guys?
Hello. I think this is the first time in a while that Zero's shown up in the chat.
He's shown up in the chat, but he does tend to lurk on plenty of our shows, actually, from what he's told me.
Ah.
Uses us as background.
I'm flattered, but at least I'm contributing.
Enemy Crab says, I'm not sure which part of our statement was in relation to this. He said, like Earthbound.
I think she's referring to the whole thing of psychics being mages in a different coat of paint.
Ah, yes. Okay, yes. When we say casters, we mean generally people who use mythical means outside of their physical body for whatever. Now, true to form for some reason, East Asia, when it comes to casters, they tend to blend with everything else, especially if you look at Wuxia and Xianxia. Like, Wuxia is much more martial.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's
but
in the damn name.
It is, but Monk, please tell me where it says you can create sword chi as part of physical reality.
It's in the same place where cooking is a martial art.
Ranma. Okay, nice. We're gonna go with a Ranma reference. Cool.
I wasn't even trying to go for Ranma. I'm just speaking generally.
Oh, I know. Well, and the thing is, even in cultivation, especially in Chinese cultivation, they do differentiate between what are called body cultivators, chi cultivators, and spirit or soul cultivators. And the strongest people are always the ones who do all three, even though that's the most difficult path, but they get them all right and they balance them out and they become superpowered. But, that's Chinese Qianxia in a nutshell. Everything becomes God in the end. Just don't question it.
Yeah. Now, with that in mind, the big it's funny that you bring that up because as we're going to be hinting at, this whole thing of mages are supposed to be a tier above everybody else is very much a Western thing, not only that, a very modern Western thing, because obviously you look at ancient mythology and you have people committing defeats of great martial or great physical skill that match or even surpass what any mage could conjure up.
Achilles.
And
or Odysseus himself. The entire Odyssey is man as himself, without any real magic. All the magic comes from the gods and outside him, and they go to help him sometimes. But Odysseus, holy shit! A bow that he has to restring that he almost can't, that then shoots through 3 fucking people. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And of course the whole thing with blinding Polyphemus.
Mm-hmm.
Who blinded Polyphemus? Nobody did. Well, nobody's gonna rescue Polyphemus.
Who blinded you? Nobody. Nobody? Yeah, that's what he said his name. Man, Odysseus was a dick, but he was a smart dick. Regardless.
Yeah. The other thing is admittedly a lot of this does stem from the mage martial divide that we see in more litigious and more ubiquitous TTRPGs. But the thing is, this is something where shit rolls downhill. A problem unresolved in one thing, when a bunch of people take inspiration from that one thing, carry that problem with it.
Well,
eventually smarter heads prevail in several cases, but it's what happens when when you're not really thinking about whether or not that actually works.
yeah. And I think that some people take extreme examples from Western mythos and Western European mythos and folklore to show how magic is so much greater than martial, and so like people incorrectly, I might add, make a comparison between, say, Merlin and Arthur. I'm like, okay, so first of all, depending on which myth, Merlin was taught by the queen of the fucking fairies himself.
Well, you also have people who try and use Gandalf as the example of what you should be using a wizard for your campaign. Except Gandalf, for all intents and purposes, is an angel.
Not all intents and purposes. Gandalf is. He's a Maiar.
Mm-hmm.
Just like Sauron was a Maiar.
Yeah.
But Morgoth before Sauron was a Valar. One of the bigger angels. we could get into that cosmology forever. Let's not.
Yeah. The point is that when you're dealing with people who are on that supernatural tier, they're not a good point of comparison.
Yeah, which is why I say the comparison between Merlin and Arthur, first of all, is erroneous because Merlin really never used his magic for anything big, because he understood that the more you use magic, the more it fucks with the world, at least when it comes to those particular myths. And second of all, he was a mentor, almost a grandfather figure to Arthur in most of the stories. Like he was there to help guide the boy into manhood and make sure he makes good decisions, to help him become a good king.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of it was good. In fact, there's a really good movie that I'm not sure everybody has watched and really should. 1984, Excalibur.
Yeah.
That shows some of Arthur's flaws, like when he's fighting another knight and about to lose, so he sticks the sword back into the lake to get his power back because he doesn't want to be defeated. And Merlin shows up at the end of that fight and looks pretty disappointed in Arthur. But, you know, that's just one of the big things that that I've seen compared. A lot of people who make these comparisons do so with either a limited amount of knowledge or a limited understanding.
And this is as good a time as any for me to bring up the one particular incident that I've brought up in the past. So, I know I've talked about this plenty of times over the last 9 years, but once again, I have to talk about the Book of Nine Swords.
The Book of Weeaboo Fight Hand Magic, as all the detractors called it. Or the jokesters like me, who just use it as a joke because it's funny.
This for those unaware, because I know there's a good chunk of people here who are less familiar with those early days. The book, this book was an expansion for D&D Third Edition. I think
Yep.
third or 3.5. I can't remember when the line was done.
Let's just roll it all into one, Monk, because
Most people do, and they call it 3.x.
Yep. Bill says, always dug the Book of Nine Swords. It's so broken, pun intended.
I'll get to that in a minute. But it caused a bit of a stir. Because
From the side that said you can't make... Yeah.
Yeah, because for one, there was the argument that it was turning fighters into casters. And which given the popularity of Gish builds, was always amusing to me. Gish, for those who don't know, is people who can do martial stuff and do magic stuff just as well.
It arises from a very old monster that could do that.
What would become the Gith Zerai.
Yep.
The other thing was people had issues with it very blatantly in the first few pages, citing that it was drawing inspiration from Final Fantasy and Devil May Cry and a couple others I can't recall specifically at this time. Because keep in mind, I haven't looked in that book in over a decade, so cut me some slack. And I got in trouble for saying that not only was I perfectly fine with this, I knew that more was going to be coming. Because at the time I had said, you are going to have a whole generation of people getting into fantasy or getting into gaming or what have you, who their inspiration was not the works of John Burroughs. Not John Burroughs, Edgar Rice Burroughs, what am I saying? Their inspiration was not Moorcock. It was, or Lieber, or Tolkien. Although, given the popularity of the movies, I might have to amend the Tolkien thing, but that's another story. Their introduction to fantasy was things like the Final Fantasy series, maybe Harry Potter, maybe anime like Slayers or Record of Lodoss War. And I know some might say, wasn't Lodoss a D&D replay? Yeah, but the characters and the storytelling that Lodoss is doing is not doing anything like what people would expect a D&D story to do. Like it may have started as such, but by the time we start to get the novels and the like, you can't really make that comparison anymore. It's crossed the threshold into its own thing.
Yep.
And a lot of the people who get into it through those means, some of them are going to become designers, and they're going to want to make games based on the stuff that they grew up with. If you need a case in point with this, consider how a lot of the stuff that the new Hollywood people were during the 1970s were doing was rooted in stuff that they grew up with, whether it be adventure serials, whether it be crime fiction, whether it be monster movies.
Well, people draw inspiration from the things they're interested in. That's just part of creativity. People like a thing.
I'd also bring up Tarantino and the fact that he cut his teeth on that grindhouse ghetto theater cinema of the 70s.
And his own foot fetish. He puts his foot fetish in every movie and sometimes casts himself as someone fulfilling that foot fetish.
Yeah.
Man, Tarantino, putting yourself in the position where you drink alcohol off of Selma Hayek's foot, goddamn genius for someone with a foot fetish, and the rest of us all knew what you were doing.
Mm-hmm. But the point is we've talked about this before. This idea that if you're going to be doing fantasy, that you have to be drawing upon the exact same points of inspiration is not only a stupid idea, it's actively toxic.
it will cause stagnation, and it will further hamper the development of anything new.
Yeah.
All you'll be doing is rewriting the same shit over and over again, which gets boring.
Mm-hmm. And since Dredd brought up how broken it is, I'd like to I would like to speak on the notion of game balance. Now, obviously John Wick, no, not that one, had said at one point that he felt balance was unnecessary because chess is not a role-playing game and some shit. This was on his live journal years ago. And I found it a bit ridiculous because this is the same guy who, when he introduced Void Magic into L5R, everybody gave him shit for how busted the Void spells were back during his run. Although that run was late first edition and a bit of second edition, and no L5R fan wants to talk about second edition.
What edition? I don't know what you're talking about.
But that's a case of don't throw stones in the glass house.
You know, it's damn weird that L5R just went first edition, third edition like that.
Yeah, then again there's a bunch of editions of Battle Lords that I haven't been able to get access to.
You know, it's also damn weird that Devil May Cry went Devil May Cry 1 to Devil May Cry 3 like that.
Or Wild Arms went from 3 to 5.
Yeah. Skipping numbers is kind of weird, but I guess if that's what you want to go for.
Or
Wild Arms 4 wasn't that bad. I don't remember much about it, like, not even as a joke.
How can you say it wasn't that bad? You don't.
I played through it. I remember kind of liking it. It's just not the most memorable of things out there.
And that's arguably worse than it being a bad game.
But
Dredd says, or D&D.
But the point is that I think a lot of people misinterpret the idea of balance, because a lot of people think, if you want game balance, you want everybody to be the same, or that having things unbalanced is a good thing for a game. And I've always argued that those are very surface level views on balance.
Well,
the key thing with balance is that no matter what, something can be viable. This is the reason why the better games in this sense, like let's look at fighting games, for instance. Like, ideally, even if you have a health advantage in a given fighting game, when it's done right, you can still have the risk of being punished if you screw up.
Most fighting games have that no matter which character you play.
Mm-hmm.
Some characters have higher floors or higher ceilings, but they're all viable.
Yeah. The problem ends up happening when you have characters who are so good that they're stepping on everyone's toes. And I see Zero perked up in fighting games.
Zero's a big FGC fan.
Oh.
Well, FG fan. I don't know about the FGC anymore.
I think he's too clean for the FGC.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think back when we did the Valley of the Judged for Heavens and Heresies, and we're in pretty consistent and constant contact with Brother Tanner, I think we collectively came up with a really good definition for game balance vis-a-vis TTRPGs. And that was no character, no class, no feature should be able to completely take over the game and overshadow everyone else to the detriment of fun. Every build, every feature, everything you can do should be completely viable, so that both at times when you need to do a an individual feat of excellence, or when you have to group together and do your feat of excellence as a team, all of it is viable. Nobody feels left out, because that was one of the biggest problems that casters have had in D&D for forever. Is, hey, high level caster, I'm going to cast haste and a few other things. Oh, by the way, yeah, nobody gets to do anything and the encounter's over. Bye.
Mm-hmm.
To quote the druid from one of the older Order of the Stick comics, I possess class abilities stronger than your entire class.
Yep.
Yeah.
Godzilla from the age of 3 and 3/5. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not even power gaming. That's of course you're going to take Wild Shape as a druid in 3rd edition. It's the most obvious thing you could take playing that game.
Especially since there was a feat you could really easily get that allowed you to
still cast while wild shaping,
Yeah.
which
Wild
takes away
casting. That was
which
it.
takes away the one supposed disadvantage of wild shape, and even
So now you're a bear with you're a bear that's normally normally difficulty class 12 because you're a dire bear or something that can also cast fucking Moonbeam.
Jesus, I love someone actually broke down the numbers. Like the higher level druid animal companion was a better fighter than the fighter.
Mhm.
That's just the animal companion. Unbuffed.
Codzilla is a little lesser these days. It's not really Codzilla, it's Cowzilla in 5 because it's cleric or warlock.
And even if, I know some people will go, that was just a 3.x thing. We solved that in the past and we solved that in the future. Bullshit. Because
you solved it in the edition we're not supposed to like, maybe.
Because this is where I get to one other problem. And that is bloat. Because in order to the argument is that casters need a bunch of spells to be viable, but in the process of doing that, the amount of the pages of spells entries in several games got big enough to be outright appalling. In the 2E, everybody will poke fun at say the ridiculous amount of spells in say 3E. In the 2E era and earlier in the TSR era, it could be just as bad. There were whole books that had nothing but spells in an Encyclopedia Britannica way, where a bunch of spells that start with the letter A, the letter B, the letter C. In all of that, and I see what James is going with. No, do not give me that whole only recognized by the literate bullshit. I'm not doing that.
I'm going to say it like this. The spell lists have been bloated for ages. Not only by spells with extremely long descriptions, because that's a thing, but also by the fact that there are 20 different spells under 20 different names using very similar components and all doing very similar things. Why do I need 4 of these spells that do the same ass thing with different names?
But there is also issues of spells that completely render a given archetype pointless. My favorite example of this has been knock. Because with just one spell cast, an entire class becomes useless. And if you think I'm going a bit extreme, I said this exact same kind of thing about the drop shield back in Halo Reach. Because when Reach came out, it brought back the whole health and shield thing. You know, you had regenerating health, but you couldn't take too many mistakes. Mm-hmm. Except if you had the drop shield mod, where with the press of a button, you get most of your health back, no matter where you were.
Yeah.
And
now,
since those things were on cooldowns, that made the problem even worse.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, for those of you unfamiliar with knock, from Player's Handbook 3.5, specifically page 246, It can be learned by a lot of things, but using base classes alone, Sorcerer level 2, Wizard level 2 could both learn it. It only needed a vocal component. The casting time was a standard action. The range was medium, which is 100 feet plus 10 feet per level. The target was one door, box, or chest with an area of up to 10 square feet per level. Duration is instantaneous, has no saving throw, and no spell resistance. And what it does, the knock spell opens stuck, barred, locked, held, or arcane locked doors. It also opens secret doors as well as locked or trick opening boxes or chests. It also loosens welds, shackles, or chains, provided they serve to hold closures shut. And if it is used to open an arcane locked door, the spell does not remove the arcane lock, but simply suspend its functioning for 10 minutes. In all other cases, the door does not relock itself or become stuck again on its own. Knock didn't work to raise things like barred gates or similar implements such as a portcullis, and it doesn't affect ropes, vines, and the like. And each spell can undo as many as 2 means of preventing egress. Thus, if a door is locked, barred, and held, or quadruple locked, opening it required 2 knock spells. This essentially got rid of the need for a rogue. At least one of the needs for a rogue.
I will point out, I think this argument is bad, but some people will say, we'll just have enough to warrant having a rogue. Well, are you going to sit here and design all these encounters around that fact? You're having to design all of your encounters around one stupid spell?
You know, that's one of the biggest disadvantages of D&D, Monarch. You're very right there, that a lot of the times people would design characters such as rangers that had a specific preferred enemy, and at that point, if the ranger wants to be useful, the GM would actually have to design some of the encounters around the fact that preferred enemy is present. It's fucking stupid.
Be working on that.
Since somebody wants to play the whole smell your fear, let me bring in the bloat issue. Because we've already talked about too many different spells, but there is an experiment that I've done in the past, comparing the total number of pages for a given book and how many pages are just dedicated to spell descriptions. So let me bring up the scan that I have of the original Men in Magic book all the way back in white box. This version that I have is around 36 pages long. So let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pages just to spells in a 36-page book.
That's 1/3 of the book.
Mm-hmm. So no, I'm not going to go with this whole, oh, it was perfectly fine until it was screwed up. No, this is when you have that much time dedicated to one archetype. Other archetypes aren't able to get as much attention, especially when you have other archetypes that only get maybe 1 page or half a page if they're lucky. So no, I'm not letting that whole magical Gilded Age kind of thing pass. It's not happening.
Moving the goalposts. Hooray! Regardless, I can't help but compare the spell bloat that we see in the world's most litigious RPG to what we're going to be doing in our next Cloister runs, Monk. Because I think I said this last night when we were talking about the spell lists. Mm-hmm. They are compact. Everything is unique and viable, and for most of the casting classes, you don't get more than 4 or 5 spells total per level. Fairy Tamer is an exception because it gets 1 spell per elemental type it has and the basic per level, so that's 7 spells a level, but that's 1 spell in each level. Mm-hmm. But in the end, the massive amount of spells that seem like they repeat. I mean, What's the difference between, what was it? Prestidigitation and thaumaturgy and like
An example I always go with is how many versions of protection from do you really need as their own entries?
Protection from evil, protection from good, protection from lawful, protection from chaotic.
And
Protection.
Even then, with all those you're essentially repeating the same entry, and that's again an issue of just adding more space.
Yeah, you easily could have just named the spell protection, and then in the text of the spell say choose one of the 4 alignment markers: good, evil, law, chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what your protection spell will protect from. It is as simple as doing that. But no, you had to have a separate entry for each one. I know that Magic the Gathering had 5 separate cards for the circles of protection, but that's because it's a fucking card game!
Also, the reason why you're not going to see me get on say Ars Magica for this kind of thing is because Ars Magica is built from the get-go with 2 things. One, you are playing as mages within a given circle in medieval Europe. 2, you are expected to play multiple characters in what that game is always called a passion play design, where you are switching between different actors the way you'd see different actors in a play.
Mm.
Also, since AD&D was invoked, let me break that out. So that book is 100. The version that I have is 130 pages when it comes to the player's handbook. And let's see, let's include the tables. That is, I believe. Let's see. So, spellcasting is on page 39. So, from page 39 to page 99 is spells. So, what percentage do you get out of that?
Say those numbers again. My mind just went what the fuck for a second.
So again, the book is 100. The book that I have is 130 pages.
Let's
see.
And how many pages of spells?
All right, and I'm including the spell tables.
Okay.
So that is from page 42 to page 101.
42 to 101?
Yep.
You kidding me? First of all, that's fucking 59 pages. And so divide that by 130 and you've got 45%, Monk. Specifically 45.4%. Almost half the fucking book. But the magic the magic bloat isn't just something we see in D&D either. Like D&D is one of the more egregious examples because of how how much exposure there is to it. But we've seen bloat in other games.
Mm-hmm.
In games we like even.
Yeah, I've as much of a fan as I am of Final Fantasy over the years, I will freely admit that for the first few entries, this was it definitely had this particular problem. In fact, one might argue that the original FF was the absolute worst with this problem.
One might argue that the spell bloat in FF is mostly because they didn't make everything as viable as they could. The spells people tend to gravitate towards in Final Fantasy are of three very specific categories. Elemental damage spells, because elemental weaknesses are super useful. Any of the healing/cleansing spells, your cures, your asunas, etc. Anything that gets rid of your debuffs and status effects or keeps your HP high. And then utility spells specifically meant to make your party fucking running on hyper cocaine. Hastka and float and regen and reflect. All of those with your own reflect pierce, obviously, because you want to be able to cure yourselves. And then on anything outside of that was usually just an uber spell, like meteor. If you could get comet or meteor, it didn't matter if you had elemental damage spells at that point anymore. You're like, oh, total party non-elemental damage that just pierces defense. Let's go. and that is the focus on spells. You didn't tend to use most of the status spells, bio or any of those to inflict things that were status effects.
For the longest time, status effect spells were absolute shit to the point where nobody used them for whole generations. I'd say status effect spells in console RPGs didn't start getting useful until maybe the PS2 era.
I would argue even then it really the big thing about deciding when status spells may have been useful in Final Fantasy games is kind of an asinine debate there. Mainly because the status spells are only useful if you are looking for very specific low-level strategies in everything I've ever experienced. If you are fighting everything you come across, not even going out of your way to grind, but fighting everything you come across, developing whatever skills you need to develop in a normal fashion, getting whatever spells you need to get in a normal fashion, you'll never need to use them. Never. But if you're someone like H.C. Bailey, who wants to get a super item from an Uber boss that you can encounter early on, because he's a 100% completionist in as many of his LPs as possible, he will come up with a strategy to use some of the most off-the-wall status and negative effect spells to lock down the monster enough so that it can't really kill his underleveled party. Mm-hmm. And there you go. He did that with Radiant Historia especially. While not a Final Fantasy game, it also has some really cool strategy stuff you can do.
Yeah. Also, I gotta love what Dreadlord said. Hey, Uber spell, come get me for 50% off. Are you drunk again?
Is he never not drunk?
Now, I will say in relation to bloat, I don't actually think it's a problem if a wizard has a lot of spells. I'm not saying there's not a lot of stupid spells that need to be cut, and some that are just, what the fuck are you doing in this game like this, a la knock. I don't mind the wizards having a huge amount of spells to pick from for putting their spell list together. Well, I don't think that's where the problem comes from. I think it's when you look at the marshals by comparison, you're like, what the fuck are you doing here?
Well, this is the reason why I brought up the bloat, because you're only going to be able to have so many pages in a given book. And I remember talking about this with Routes a long time ago. Because I decided to ask him, since you were on the ground in those early days, do you have any idea why prestige classes were put in where the first prestige class, the assassin, was put in the Dungeon Master's Guide instead of the Player's Handbook, where you think it would naturally be suited?
And it's because all of the PHB real estate had been used.
Yeah. That's the reason I
Yeah.
bring up that kind of bloat, because the more space that you dedicate to one thing,
Yeah.
that's a bigger slice of the pie. And we've all had pie. We all like pie, all kinds of pie. You make a bigger slice, that doesn't mean that everybody else gets a equally big slice. You've only got so much room on the pie tin, unless you're one of those degenerates that cuts the pie into squares, or cuts your pizza into squares.
Monk is
Well,
looking
say
at
some
me, even though he
games-
knows I never would.
This shouldn't be a problem. I'll say you're 3.5. It shouldn't be a problem because there's so goddamn many splat books.
Even in
Over
You should
50.
still be able to do enough for your marshals, which they struggle with.
there was also that. There's also the issue. This is a bit of an issue of Magic's system, because you'll notice in a lot of the cases where we don't have a problem with the whole Uber Mage kind of thing, there's usually some kind of magic system that's tied to the world or the game that creates a counterbalance.
Well, and not only that, whether it's a counterbalance that makes it so that novaing as a mage is not advisable, because then you're basically spent for the next foreseeable future, or whether it's everybody else is just as engaged as a mage can be. Either of those solutions works. When we've looked at systems where we're not having any problems with how uber fucking powerful a mage can be, it's one of those two things. And usually we tend to give a little more praise to the system that makes it so that your marshals, your other types of casters, everybody else is engaging with the world just as much as that mage is, rather than the world just limiting a mage down to where everybody else is. We want to give all players more choice, not bring player choice down to a low denominator.
And yes, James, I have played a lot of 3.5 style systems. I would not call them horrific, but they have problems.
Everybody, there's shit in everybody's yard.
Yeah.
I only pick on certain games over others when people act like there is no shit in their yard.
Their shit don't stink.
Mm-hmm. As much as I love Shadowrun, I have always been very critical of the ridiculous amount of skills with it, or the false choice issue when it comes to the whole. Oh, we're a classless system. In theory, in practice, you aren't.
And in practice, the packages that you advertise as being, oh, you could pick all these different packages. It's like, yeah, but if I don't pick these specific packages in this order, all of my packages are less effective. So I might as well just go with being a decker, since that's what makes me most effective with these packages.
Or you have, and I know some might say, what about Cyberpunk 2020? Its role system is in the vein of archetypes, which I've always described as a halfway point between class-based and going full classless. Because there in something like Cyberpunk 2020 or Red, you have a role. It's going to skew towards certain skills, and there's going to be one particular ability that's unique to you. Each role has that one ability that no other role has.
I would argue that Sword World also is an archetypal system that leans towards the classless, but it still has that guidance.
It still has that guidance, but it's one that is going to come a bit organically because of its classes as packages design.
Yeah. I'm saying it's a type of archetype system that leans more towards classless, but still isn't fully.
Mm-hmm. And of course, there's also Anima, which has a class system, but it's more of an archetype, since your class just determines what you're going to be better at learning.
And your class also kind of determines what power source you may have, depending on if you're choosing one of the 4 different types of I can't say magically because there's key in there, but
well,
four of the casty inclined peoples.
Admittedly, the thing that ends up determining whether or not you can use a lot of the castier stuff is the whole advantage disadvantage thing.
Yep.
Uh, but even beyond that, you don't have to develop key skills if you don't want to.
Yeah.
And you don't if you pick that you have the gift, you don't have to pick wizard.
Exactly. I'd also like to point out that when it comes to anima and its quote unquote spell or skill lists, any of the casty stuff is, if you really want to, build your own. I love that modular build your own.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I didn't use it during our very first cooperation because of time constraints.
We are all fans of anime here.
Time constraints and two other people bailing on me.
I just went with some of the pre-built stuff in the book that was used as example because I figured it was good enough for character creation. But if I went back and did it again, I'd probably build my own stuff.
And hell, if of course even with that there were ways of crossing over, such as some of the stuff that was in the Exet books, like the elemental seals that were introduced in Dominus Exet.
I love Dominus Exet. That book is so good.
Which is a way to answer the question of, I want to be able to do summoning stuff, but I don't want to deal with the whole needing the gift and having to do the summoner rule set. Well,
yep.
No. I think part of the reason that was introduced was because Naruto was getting a whole lot more attention.
I could imagine that being a thing, which then just makes me think about Naruto 5e again.
Mm-hmm. Don't worry, it's time will come. And
I have to ask, Monk, at some point can we set that up as a valley?
I would like to. I really would. And if it was in the form that it was when I first found it, I probably would have said yes. Where it was just a core book called the Shinobi Handbook.
But now it's a bunch of stuff.
Now because due to years of development from King and the rest of the crew, along with a lot, and I mean a lot, of homebrewing, they came to the conclusion that putting it in just the Shinobi Handbook would result in a handbook that's 700 pages long or something like that. Especially since people were making a lot of clans, which is the equivalent to race, but not entirely, because you get a lot more stuff from your clan.
Your clan's almost like your clan is almost like a second class in that case.
Mm-hmm. So the base rules became the Shinobi Handbook in its current form.
Okay.
The Jutsu rules were folded into Jiraiya's Jutsu Companion.
Oh my god.
The clan and the Jutsu Companion, which includes a shitload of jutsu of all three types, as well as rules for custom making jutsu of all types, including taijutsu, as well as adding buki jutsu, which was basically taijutsu but using weapons.
So 10-10 then. Got it.
Well, there is a class called a weapons specialist, and characters like 10-10 would fit right into that. For the classes proper, that was folded into Orochimaru's Observations of Shinobi Classifications.
Oh Jesus.
And that's where they put in a lot of the classes, and there's been quite a few. And the clans were put into their own book, Tsunade's Studies on Shinobi Heritage.
That's quite a bit. Oh man. You're right, we couldn't really do a valley on that, but I think we can go rails now, Monk.
Yeah. But an easy way to help justify a power scaling when it comes to any sort of magic user in a game is by putting, if you're going to have phenomenal cosmic power, have phenomenal cosmic drawbacks. One of the more popular, there's two popular examples of this. One that's not as cosmic, but certainly in the same mindset, is of course Shadowrun, with the fact that you have the whole spell drain thing. You know, you can cast spells, but it's going to be draining, and eventually you're going to pass out. And the bigger example has been the way Magic works in both Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, both the FFG and the current Cubicle 7 era, and Warhammer 40,000 roleplay. Again, both the Fantasy Flight Games era and the modern Cubicle 7 era, as well as what came before, when Games Workshop was making the role-playing game by themselves. Until they handed over to Nexus, who handed over to somebody else, until it eventually got into hold of Fantasy Flight Games. And then Fantasy Flight Games got bought out by Asmodee, who also owned Nexus. And then a bunch of the RPG crowd got moved over to the revived Edge brand. And FFG is mostly doing board and card games now. But the reason why I bring up Warhammer in this case is the fact that every time you use any form of magic of consequence, you are gambling. Best case scenario, something weird just happens. Worst case scenario, you die. Even worst case scenario, you get thrown into the warp or into chaos. You know, either something weird happens, you die, or you wish you were dead. And in doing that, it helps justify the reason why everybody looks side-eyes at casters in those worlds, whether it be the old world or the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. I mean, look at how sanctioned psychers are treated by the Imperial Guard, for instance. Everybody keeps their distance.
Yep.
And even Marine chapters that have more psychers than others are treated with a bit of trepidation. And of course, how could I not use that to bring up the Blood Ravens constantly stealing your shit?
Blood Ravens chapter meets Trays in the Infinite. Who wins?
No one.
No. The result is the Blood Ravens chapter that meets him manages to steal all of his stolen artifacts, but then he gets them all in the stasis field before they can get back to the boat. So they're holding all of his stuff, but they're also stuck in a stasis field.
And of course, the big reason why, if you're going to develop magic, have a magic system is important, is unless you have that with magic, you can literally do just about anything and everything as a writer, and subsequently as a designer. And if you have that, that's gonna fail on both occasions. I remember when I had Doku on, and we had the first monastic therapy talking about High Guardian Spice, which doesn't have that, but wants to have this theme of old magic and new magic, but can't be consistent with it. And because of that, you need to establish rules whenever you're introducing something that's outside of the norm, and not just in fantasy, but science fiction just as much as well. I mean, this is part of the reason why I have a high opinion of Brandon Sanderson, even though he's probably the worst workaholic in the universe.
Yeah, his magic systems have a lot of clear boundaries to them, but within those boundaries, they do some crazy shit. That's a good thing. And to answer the one and only Leaf, this debate is based on the some of the arguing we've heard that casters should just be allowed to be, for lack of a better word, better than martial classes. Just allowed to have more and do better instead of both types of classes, magic classes and martial classes, having their own niches to each fulfill and excel in.
I know that that Dredd had brought up how broken the Book of Nine Swords is, but I do find it amusing when that one end of things being broken is perfectly fine, and the other end less so. Whereas you and I, Zan, we tend to have the concept of not only everybody being viable, but everybody having some means of doing crazy shit. And to demonstrate this, you've brought up Brawl Minus.
Yes. When it comes to game balance, there are two mindsets, and I always like to bring up the two Super Smash Brothers Brawl mods, Brawl Plus and Brawl Minus. Now, we talked earlier, considering fighting games, that in most fighting games, even though tier lists exist, remember that Tyre's Dawn exits as well. Almost every character is viable, and in the hands of someone skilled can win a tournament. That's just a thing. We've seen Dan win Street Fighter tournaments because they were in the hand of a skilled player. Mm-hmm. With party fighters, such as Super Smash Brothers, there is very clearly a point where characters that are designed thematically rather than with gameplay in mind, like they're still designed with gameplay in mind, but they're designed more around the theme of who they are rather than what they can do. There does tend to be a disconnect, and the tiers in that system do exist on a much more egregious scale. And Brawl is the big example, because you had the triple S character Meta Knight that everybody had to ban at tournaments because he was tournament centralizing, and the worst F-tier character Ganondorf because Ganondorf is too slow, doesn't have enough super armor, and all of his moves have too many recovery frames. Mm-hmm. Brawl Plus aimed to fix this by flattening the curve. They brought Meta Knight down to more reasonable standards, they brought Ganondorf up to more reasonable standards, and it worked to bring balance to make the game more, competitively viable. But Brawl Minus went, why bring everybody down when we can just elevate everything to 11? Spinal Tap references aside, the taglines for Brawl Minus have varied. Zero wrote one of them, break it till it's fixed. There was the other one where they imitated Syndrome from The Incredibles. When everyone is broken, nobody is. Or my favorite, the Borker the better.
There was one expansion to 3E that ended up answering this whole make everything broken kind of thing, and it is a third-party supplement that I would never use, but I am glad that it exists.
Yep.
That is the Immortal's Handbook.
That's a good one. To just finish the point about how Brawl Minus broke everything, though, Meta Knight became even more insane with his Cyclone. You could control it for forever, I swear to God. Captain Falcon's infamous Falcon knee that was so good in Melee and pretty good in Brawl became an instant kill from zero if you were good enough. And Ganondorf. He was still kind of slow. They sped him up a little. He had super armor out the ass, he had less recovery frames, so he could recover from his moves better, and his Warlock Punch was actually made a little slower. But the trade-off for that was, if that Warlock Punch hit you, you immediately went up to 999% damage, and then the knockback killed you. The home run mini game in Brawl was busted in Brawl Minus because everybody just would pick Ganondorf and Warlock Punch the sandbag. It would go literally. Monk, I had it go 300,000 meters at one point. Yes, 300 kilometers. And so that is how Brawl Minus decided. Yes, Zero plays Ganondorf in Brawl. He loves Ganon. But I remember all the times we went Ganon versus Bowser to see whose super armor would break first. Don't bring that up, Zero. But the way that broke the game made it fun for everyone, and also you'd say, well, then everything's unbalanced. I'm like, yes, everything is unbalanced, but everything's also fun. Everybody has super fun things they can do. It's flashy. It's cool. If you pressed up, down, up really quickly on taunts as Captain Falcon, he would repeat, show me your moves 5 times, and his next Falcon punch was an instant 1-frame punch, because holy fuck. The Death Box. I remember the Death Box.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. The whole... And so the type of ethos we tend to have when we're looking at games is, if you're making everything viable, is it also easy to stupid break it? So what? Who cares? I mean, if we use our own project, Final Fantasy Legend Project, we have, on more than one occasion while creating this game, and we've said it time and again, looked at some of the class combinations and job combinations that we've come up with and gone, this could really break stuff. And we go, good, and move on. Mm-hmm. And we know that there are going to be people out there who look at all our jobs, all our classes, and go, whoa, if I put these things together, it's going to make this really cool super uber thing. And they're going to come to us and be like, did you intend this? And it's going to be something we didn't think of. And we're going to look at it, we go, yeah, we intended that. We didn't know it could do that, but we intended that.
I've spoken a lot about future-proofing, and that the thing is that I remember going back and playing the original Modern Warfare with some old buddies a few years ago, and how even though there were certainly some perks that were more viable than others, what people were having fun with was the act of customizing to fit their playstyle, and utilizing the perks as kind of a tell for what sort of weapons they were using. And I began to see each individual weapon as its own little fighting style, essentially. And the thing is, a lot of people have tried to shame the idea of min-maxing and the like. Min-max or more recently, there was that video that got shared around of the idea of character builds is antithetical to role playing, and I'm like, no. It is just as much a part of role playing as anything else. It is just a different kind, because the person who's min-maxing, even as long as they're not being a dick, they're still being engaging. And I've found that whenever I've been in those threads about optimization, a lot of people, there's 2 kinds of people that usually show up in them. Either people who are looking to see what would be a good strategy so that they don't weigh down everyone else, or people who are doing experiments just to see what will happen. For instance, the Legend of Muscle Wizard.
I cast Fist.
Or things like the Etano Sorcerer.
I cast lasers, all of the lasers, forever.
Just 164 castings of Magic Missile.
Are you going to roll all those D4s? You bet your ass I am. Have my Caltrop Storm.
I did that once, and I showed that build to one of my GMs a long time ago, and he was like, if you try and do this, you're gonna have to roll all of those D4s yourself. I guess he thought that would be enough to dissuade me from doing it. I show up next week with this big fucking bag of D4s.
Look, I have so many dice. I love rolling dice. You give me a chance to roll like even just 50 D4, I'm rolling 50 D4.
Oh,
You can't stop me.
I do have to for a second bring this up because Zero and I are having fun talking about it in the chat. In Brawl Minus, Sonic's taunts could interrupt any of his animations, and animation cancel them immediately, including themselves. So you could spam his taunts. The fun one we'd like to do is go, come on, step it up, or you're too slow. It annoyed the shit out of everybody, and it was the best.
imagine giving that track to a DJ and just seeing what he comes up with.
Yeah, and the death box, for an explanation, because I did mention it, was a custom map we made where there was one tiny opening at the top of the box, and the rest of the walls of the box went out to the very edges of the screen, and they were all lava-covered edges, and you had one platform in the middle of the screen. So if you managed to fall off the platform, you'd hit the lava, take the damage, and probably not go outside of the box. Even with Ganondorf's Warlock Punch at 999, you'd go flying, hit the damage field of the lava, and immediately take the knockback damage of that, and you'd go pinging around the box like a goddamn pinball and almost never go out. Getting people out was hella hard. I remember we once did a 99 live relay in the death box, and we didn't finish it. A 99 life relay in the death box, and we didn't finish it. I think we were at like 60 some odd lives each after 4 hours.
All right. So it turns out I'm going to have an earlier day tomorrow than I thought. So before I bounce, I will just kind of sum up my position like this. Like, I don't really care if the band classes aren't equal. I care when you pick a class or something along those lines, ability, depending on whatever system you're looking at, and you're starting to wonder, why did I even bother? There was no point in me selecting this.
Or the opposite extreme.
Yeah, but that's kind of where I draw that line. It's I just want you to be able to pick your shit and actually still feel like you're engaged with the game.
Yeah.
When that stops, that's where the problem is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And with that, I will see you Thursday. I will see Zan Saturday so we can yell at each other about David Cage. That ought to be fun. See you guys next week.
Yeah. But
I think we should start calling Monarch Pandora.
I don't think we're going to be able to get him to wear a toga.
Why not? He wore fishnets and a corset when he was Frankenfurter.
Yeah, but if we have him wear a toga, then some of my friends over in Greece are going to get mad at me. And no, it's not for appropriation. It's for unnecessary mental pain. Although,
That's a price I'm willing to have you pay.
Besides, depending on the time of year, it might be too cold. And I'm certainly not going to wear one because there's no way I'm going to find one that fits me.
I mean, could get an undyed tartan and do the same thing. We'd have the whole 9 yards. It'd fit us.
Maybe. I think it'd be more likely to see me wear a kilt.
That's true. Pork chop, you're midway through. We're about 80 minutes in, brother.
Yeah. But one of the big reasons I bring up the whole magic the whole magic system is that a lot of magic systems and settings have particular rules. What rule, because of the whole setting but not kind of thing that the world's most litigious role-playing game does, it doesn't have the option to do that. And one can argue that there are rules to Magic in some of the settings, but again, this is where that half in, half out thing comes in, because a lot of the Magic systems that we've talked about have particular rules that they follow. Even something like Final Fantasy technically does in some form, whether it be explaining the relationship between Magicite, Espers, and Magic in 6, whether it be the relationship that the moons have when it comes to Magic in 4, the tapping into ancient power through materia in 7, obviously the junctioning in 8, the whole Gaia and Terra relationship in 9, the relationship between souls, the soul thing in 10,
and we could go on.
Yeah. Even if it's just using MP, there is a reason given. And as much as I love the Suikoden series, I've always been critical of the question of why does this need the spell charge approach a la the Vancian model. Now the whole you equip runes to get magic, that I get. I'm perfectly fine with that. I don't have any problem with that, especially given how there's the implication that the true runes have something of a consciousness.
Yeah. But I'd also argue that Suikoden doesn't really have the martial magic split issue that we have in the West because, well, Suikoden is based on the water margin.
It certainly doesn't it's early on. You could make the argument, but it's kind of evened out by the fact that you have larger parties and larger casts, and thus a bigger variety to work with. But later on, and I want to say this was introduced in 3. It may have been in 2. I don't feel like checking. The idea of a grade-based skill system started to be introduced.
Yeah,
and some of those skills were almost akin to feat slots. It was another arm of customization.
Yeah.
There's also the fact that there was the introduction of the unite attacks, and a formation system. So even with the idea being you're not supposed to be treating your party in that as individual units, but as a small squad, not far removed from a squad-based shooter like Brothers in Arms.
Yeah.
Where the fun factor is not in how powerful individual units are, but how you use the combined whole.
The fun factor is creating that custom unit that works in such good synchronicity you just raffle stomp things.
Deathwatch had a similar thing where you had two benefits: solo mode and squad mode. Squad mode was a shared benefit that your entire kill team had. Solo mode was obviously more individualistic. The idea being, when you're in squad mode, the whole crew is acting as one integrated unit with a particular benefit depending on who's the squad leader. And solo mode is obviously, well, out of that. And we talked about Anima before. That one that has multiple sets of rules regarding its supernatural ability. The way Dominus work is not the same way that Magic is going to work, and the same thing goes with Psychics. The big reason we bring up D&D 4th edition in this kind of thing is they decided to just double down and introduce the idea of power sources, and each of them had a reason for what it was.
Yeah.
Marshall was the analogy with Marshall that was used during development was to think of an Olympic athlete, which is certainly fitting because I watch the Summer Olympics every 4 years, and I've seen people do crazy shit in that, and there's whole there's whole there's whole YouTube channels just dedicated to crazy things that that what would be standard humans have done. Uh, and I see Brian saying, "By the power of Xenocide, we are stronger together." Some Space Marines in Death Watch, probably.
Yeah, you're probably right there.
No, he is. Some are not. Given what Death Watch is supposed to be in universe, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to when it came back, getting back to fourth, obviously you had divine and arcane, which those ones are self-explanatory. The idea of a primal power source of the spirit of the world who wants to defend itself from the heavenly and hellish powers that keep wrecking its house.
Yep.
The supernatural equivalent of "get off my lawn." Then
Kind of feels like the if I'm going to be honest, that kind of feels like a lot of the whole spirit of the world confronting the outer gods thing that we see in a lot of eldritch mythos, whether that's Lovecraft or otherwise.
yeah, and obviously countries that have countries whose media has a more animist slant always have the whole "the world is alive" kind of thing.
Yep.
Um, he says a space wolf and a dark angel will never be friends. You know what's a really good way. You know what's a really good way to make people friends? Give them something to shoot at. Just saying it worked for the U.S. And remember, one of the rules of combat is teamwork is essential. It gives them other people to shoot at.
Absolutely.
And when Player's Handbook 3 came out for 4th edition, they reintroduced psionics as its own power source. Also made the monk a psionic, which I wasn't 100% on board with, but I can understand why they did it.
I still remember the extended psionics handbook being the most broken rule set in all of 3.5.
Mm-hmm. Psionics we've talked about this before. Psionics has been one of those things that is very hard to get right in a fantasy setting for some reason, where it ends up stepping in the same turf as casters. It just feels like casters in a different coat of paint.
Casters in a different coat of paint that seemed to be more powerful because there was no attempt to reconcile how psionics interact with everything else.
Yeah, but the other thing is when it came to psionics, it was described as the universe creating a defense mechanism, almost like white blood cells, to combat the threat of the gate that was keeping the outsiders out. There was even a new race that was introduced called the Shard Mind that was part of that Shard Gate that that ended up gaining sentience.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that with that there's stuff you can do within those. And granted, arcane and I've seen some people say that having these sort of explanations is taking the magic out of magic. The whole magic should remain mysterious. You can have it remain mysterious as much as you like to the characters in a setting, but when you're building the world itself, I don't think you can get away with that. Unless you want to feel like you're just pulling things out of your ass and saying it's magic, I don't gotta explain shit. That's not to say you should explain everything, but you should explain enough. Oh. And when it came to obviously for a lot of this we've focused on D&D, but I'd say for the tail end of this, we should talk about how this is not only just a more of a Western thing than an Eastern thing, but also how when we look at a lot of Eastern media, this whole martial magical line completely shatters.
Yeah. We've said the term once, and we'll probably say it ad infinitum. Gestalt fantasy, a genre that is basically like fusion. We feel that, especially in East Asian fantasy, where genres tend to intermix so often, the idea that you can cut things into clear little boxes doesn't work. I mean, it doesn't work in the West either. People still just do it because, well, they do. But as I was mentioning at the beginning of all of this about Wuxian Xianxia, and even to a greater extent Xuanhuan, which is a form of Xianxia that includes a lot of Western or non-Eastern influence to it, the idea that martial characters and magic characters are completely separate things is kind of fucking dumb. I will give you an example from one of the books I am reading. A character, let me actually go make sure I read his name correctly. Pretty sure it's Yun Xiao. Is a reincarnator. He was killed as a mortal and is now an immortal. And he starts as what is called a sword cultivator. They have a sword bone in their body. They have a sword soul as their cultivation method. It's a sword they can manifest outside of their body in 3 different forms: a small flying sword, a normal-sized long sword they refer to as the palm sword because it's about the size of a palm leaf, like the big palm leaves. Mm-hmm. And then the sovereign sword, which is a 6-foot-long sword that they fly around while standing on. And that's how he starts his cultivation journey. It's mostly a physical type of cultivation when it comes to the sword itself. But you can strengthen the sword externally by absorbing the magic from demons' bones, or turning demons' souls into little crystals that you can install on the sword to get demon magic rings. Now, you can already see how he's gone from what is mostly a purely martial character to a martial magic gish in no time at all. But later on in the book, he also learns Taoist magic, which just involves using the energy and the cultivation energy inside himself to cast spells. So this split doesn't really exist. Even in a book where there's someone who is a pure body cultivator, some of the feats that a high-level body cultivator can do are flatten the trees for 10 miles by simply slapping the air, breaking space-time by punching it. Mm-hmm. That's not magical. That's just the physical force of their body cultivation. I can punch you out of space-time. And no, this is not a Gurren Lagann reference. So, this idea that a martial character is going to somehow be hampered or lesser than a magical character is, frankly, absurd. It's in the East. It's a combination of the feats just get more and more ludicrous, and everybody has them. Everybody has these feats of strength that are just fucking mind-boggling, and the source of their power really doesn't matter at that point. Mm-hmm. Also, everybody, read Wuxin Xianxia novels. You'll love them. I almost guarantee it.
There's also the issue that I think one of the big reasons why there's this huge divide in a lot of quote unquote Western fantasy. It ties into those origins of the, how do I want to put this, the wargaming thing. Because consider how a lot of the martial characters would be treated as foot soldiers
Infantry.
in a standard war game. Infantry, yes.
Yeah, and then magical characters are basically artillery, mobile artillery.
They in chainmail they pretty much were.
Yeah, so it's really, I can see how it arises out of the wargaming attitudes.
Mm-hmm. And even in modern fantasy wargaming, the caster has his own phase. In quite a few games. Obviously Warhammer had it where you had the casting phase, the shooting phase, then the charging phase. And in something like a skirmish game or a tactics RPG, in a lot of early iterations of that, you have essentially martial characters treated as chess pawns, and the more casty characters treated as characters like the back row pieces on a chessboard. You know, your rooks, your bishops, basically the ones that have the most amount of potential movement. Well, except for the king, but that's another story.
You know what tactics game I feel really evened the playing field between casters, when it comes to video games at least, really evened the playing field between magic casters and martial characters?
Mm-hmm.
Disgaea.
Yeah, because much like with Brawl Minus, everybody can be busted.
I once reincarnation that you do at the Imperial Senate thing, the Hell Senate.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't played this guy in a while. Don't look at me that tone of voice, people. I once had Laharl reincarnate so many times he had every one of the mage classes and combat classes, and was like level 4 billion something.
Mm-hmm.
At least in stats. I could have him cast Omega Fire, which encompasses like a 7x7 grid on the field. But I could also have him use one of the best sword moves in the game that I forget the name of, that encompasses a 9x9 field. Man, I love that game. I love that game, but holy shit. That game gets fucking ridiculous.
Well, it's not meant to be taken seriously anyways, so if it's getting ridiculous, then mission accomplished.
Yep, mission failed successfully.
Mm-hmm. And even in and let's also consider that in those old war games, whether you're doing pike and shot or doing something a bit more contemporary, the most important pieces on the board were things like artillery, or cavalry, or armor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially since there were a lot of tank battle centered games back in the 70s, and because those were that important piece, this is where you end up having things kind of roll downhill. And Brian asked, "What would a wuxia style D&D look like?" We already know what that would look like. We're not exactly short on choices for that, because we've talked about some of them.
Okay, so I want to be a little more specific in the definition. When you say a wuxia style D&D, do you mean a D20 wuxia game, or do you just mean a wuxia tabletop? Because saying wuxia style D&D has some connotations, and I want to make sure that the definition is correct. Because if I'm just going to throw out a wuxia tabletop game, Righteous Blood, Ruthless Blades.
Let's see, Righteous Blood, Ruthless Blades, Wandering Heroes of Ogre Gate, Strength Tales of Songling. Okay, that one's kind of pushing it as far as wuxia. Keen the Warring States, which I reviewed like 8 years ago.
Legends of the Woolen,
Legends of the Wooland, Weapons of the Gods.
Lone Wolf Fists.
Yeah, Lone Wolf Fist by our boy Joel. Um, the I would also say, not
Tianxia.
yeah Tiansha. Um, let's see, Pang the Wandering Shaolin.
At this point, we're just naming wuxia games.
Yeah. It's Kill the Buddha, even though you have to dig around on Scrib to find that because the original site is dead.
Wuxia mechanics in a D&D setting? Okay, so do you mean adding wuxia mechanics to D&D's mechanics, or just wuxia in one of the many D&D worlds, such as Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, etc.? Because again, the word setting can mean a very specific thing.
Mm-hmm. And there are examples of that of each, but in every one of them, a lot of the what would be considered core mechanics of D&D have to get blown straight to hell. There, not. Dragon says, "Isn't there a wuxia class already?" Not exactly. Because the problem is having a wuxia class is like having a samurai class. It's so broad that is the example of that whole meme of, do you have any idea how little that narrows it down?
Yeah. Wuxia, all that... Okay, so wuxia's magical mechanics shoved into a probably generic Western fantasy scene.
Except that line between... This is something that Zan's been trying to hammer home. That line between magic and martial does not exist in wuxia.
Yeah. In wuxia, like, there's a lot more magic when it comes to xianxia because they do things that are like actual. They call it things like Taoist magic. At least when translated properly. But in wuxia, because it's supposed to be a little more quote unquote grounded. I say a little more, it's really not. They are supposed to be the penultimate limit of human anything, basically. If you're talking about the things like jumping off the single blades of bamboo that we see in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or things like being immune to every poison ever so that you can be the best poisoner, or things like the guy who can cut the clouds by swinging his sword. These are all things you see in wuxia. They're not really described as magic, and they're not really described as martial. They're just feats of a martial hero. Mm-hmm. It is a pretty silly question, and I understand wanting to ask the question just for the brainstorming and theory crafting. We always appreciate that. Yeah. It's just that boundary, that whole split in genre, doesn't really exist in the East, in East Asia specifically. Mm-hmm. They have this overlap. I mean, you could even say, for example, using a series that I have dropped but still have fond memories of the early stuff for, My Hero Academia. There's a character in there who, his superpower is he has a tail, and he does a lot of martial arts along with that tail, and does a lot of really great feats that are beyond human because of that tail. On the same side, we have a girl who, using the fat lipids in her body, can create anything she knows the composition of.
Yeah.
Both of those are technically physical feats of something, but one of those is obviously much more magical, quote unquote, than the other. A guy who can generate electricity from his body. You could argue that it's a physical feat as well. He just takes the natural electrical field of a human, boosts it as high as he can, but it also fries his brain if he's not careful. The separation between the two is it's an asinine one when you look at anything in East Asia.
Yeah, you're not going to have. I know I talked about the Gish concept, The best the when it comes to this whole magic and martial thing, um, the what would be considered the a lot of attack magic in a more Western perspective is just seen as another form of kung fu.
Mm-hmm.
That I think a throwing around a fireball is not going to be seen as anything other than a different form of kung fu because of how broad the word itself is. And a lot of the wuxia TTRPGs that I've talked about, what is considered in the domain of the magic system is things like alchemy and divination and predictionism.
Yeah, those things are more clearly "quote unquote" mystical, and I guess I should say mystical rather than magical. Oh, you're talking about putting essentially he's trying to find a way to marriage the gap that you see in Western fantasy games like D&D. He is what I think Mechanics was more saying.
Now, the truth be told, the simplest answer is use something other than D&D because you're going to be putting a round peg in a square hole. That's the simple answer. But if you absolutely insist, you would be better served using epic rules.
There's actually on Giant in the Playground forums. There's a continuing compendium of class ideas that I really liked called the Mythos Compendium. And the Mythos Compendium takes your level of gameplay to a next level of power. You really are some sort of legendary type of being, starting with the Terramok, which is a barbarian on steroids whose ultimate goal is to eat the sun. And that's just one example, but that's how they decided to bridge that gap. Every character is some sort of mythological folklore story being at this point.
And
so
whenever it comes to this whole fighters shouldn't be powerful, I always think of Conan. And in a lot of Conan's books, first off, you often have the casters depicted as either this avatar of the worst aspects of quote unquote civilization as Howard saw it. Which, if that seems a bit harsh, keep in mind that in where Howard lived, when the town that he was in struck oil, a lot of the oil barons came in, and with it came a lot of boozing and whoring.
Yep.
Basically the effect of a boom town.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the fact that this was the 1920s, and Irish need not apply was certainly a thing. But which, if you look at a lot of these stories in Conan, you have this villainous sorcerer messing with powers beyond their comprehension, who is
sweet man-made horrors beyond my comprehension.
Who is contending against someone like Conan, who, for all intents and purposes, is a badass normal. Let's also consider, even with the stuff that was added with the newer games, the Doomslayer.
The Doomslayer has gone beyond just a man literally fighting through hell to a man on a crusade against hell, and I love it. In fact, I would say that if you look at the Doom games, Doom 1, Doom 2, and then up to 2016 and even into Eternal and its DLCs, you see a natural progression of a man who was just trying to fight his way out of hell to the man that now will fight hell till it's gone.
and more importantly is the you could almost argue that the Doomslayer becomes a Tiancha level hero.
He by the end of the DLC, the Ancient Gods DLC in Eternal, yeah, he's a Shenxia character for sure. He does things like actually fight God and the devil and wins.
Mm-hmm. And there's the key thing is that given how Conan was one of the many inspirations for that early style of what's referred to as old school, this idea of somebody with this phenomenal cosmic power that still gets their ass kicked by a man with a sword is something that people conveniently forget. And I do remember when it came to in my discussions with Routes, whenever he'd talk about bumping up martial characters, the people who played casters would autistically screech. Okay, not literally autistically screech, but they would raise a stink.
Yeah, the big thing is, and again using Conan here, a man with a sword who doesn't have access to these phenomenal cosmic powers has ways of overcoming such a terrible obstacle. They can use their strength, their wits. They can use any sort of subterfuge they'd like. Because Conan, the Cimmerian, was smart. He if he needed to be, he was devious. Yeah, he was strong and had a sword, but he solved as many problems without violence as he did with.
Well, everybody only knows Conan as the barbarian. Everyone forgets the whole thief, pirate, sailor, all of that stuff.
Yes, that's why I said Conan the Cimmerian for effect there.
And Cimmerians are basically proto-Celt.
Yep. The big thing is the fact that you do not need magic to stop the magical. It can certainly help, obviously. Magic against magic, fighting fire with fire is a very common concept in storytelling in general. But you don't need it. There are just as many stories of men overcoming magic without it. And so this idea that a character who is non-magical cannot be as good or even better than a character that is magical, and that people are upset when you try to elevate these non-magical characters, is asinine. It is not at all rooted in anything other than elitism.
Mm-hmm. And I see that El Jaguar has joined the chat saying, if you don't have magic, you need wits. Conan was held at quote-unquote gunpoint by insanely powerful sorcerers and still ended up winning by biding his time.
Absolutely. Like I said, Conan solved as many problems without magic and sometimes even without violence as he did with violence.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I've mentioned in the past my favorite Robert E. Howard character is Solomon Kane. And with Solomon Kane, it's even more so because he's nowhere near as built as Conan is.
Yeah, Solomon Kane is much more average in many different ways.
I feel that the huge bulk when it comes to Conan is in part due to the impact of Frazetta's artwork of him, but with Kane, I'd actually say Kane has more in common with, say, John Wick in terms of not being all that much in terms of sheer power, but in terms of willpower and drive, having enough to make people pause when it comes to testing him.
Yeah.
I mean, eventually he does get some degree of magic with the staff of King Solomon, but that's after him going through this lengthy experience in Africa and getting a new perspective on things. And he goes, "It's not magical though. A lot of plans are manifestations of things that do not exist in reality." I know where you're going with that, but no. That would only work in Warhammer's universe. Because there's a reason why the Imperium doesn't try to make new tech, because that breakthrough that you had with your research might just have been Tzeentch trying to fuck with you, and oops, you've now opened a portal and now there's demons everywhere.
Oop, all demons.
Mm-hmm. But the thing is, within all of these, by having a set of, even with the insanity that we see in Wuxia, there is still a set of rules that the supernatural has to follow. When it comes to cultivation, there's certain things that you have to do in order to, well, actually get that cultivation.
Yeah, there's a cultivation methods or cultivation paths, or there's a bunch of different stuff. Cultivation arts. It's called various different things, but it's usually a prescribed method of gathering the energy from the world to condense into yourself, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun shit.
Which again is why trying to I've honestly been of the belief that this idea that we need to have them separate, I'm a little bit less inclined to with time, unless there's a good reason for it. Like, say,
I mean,
oh, go ahead.
Porkchop does have a point there when it comes to Wuxian Xianxia novels. Cultivation is normal people taking their time and doing it right, and then the main character cheating their ass off so hard heaven takes notice. That is a pretty common trope that can be pretty pervasive. But I was going to say that in FF Legend Edition, plenty of our martial characters have quote unquote magic spell like abilities, if we want to use D&D terminology. Dragoon is a classic example.
Yeah, Dragoon has the whole dragon arts thing. There's the fact that several of the jobs have their own little subsystem of spell like effects. That's their own little list.
Yep, they generate their own resource for it, and it's unique to their other class features too. It usually tends to synergize with their class features.
Yeah.
So our martial characters are, well, just as magical as anybody else, if you want to use that. Or if you don't want to use the word magic because the connotation of the word magic implies, well, mages, mystical.
Yeah. And each of them are built around a strongly defined theme. Some of them have two, like, say, the monk.
Mm-hmm.
Because our monk has blitz forms and mudra forms.
Yep, and they interact. Like I said, blitzes tend to interact with the mudras and vice versa.
You use blitz to build up chakras. You spend chakras on mudras, and the cycle continues. You obviously have the whole thing with strategies and tactics that the general has.
Mm-hmm. you've also got the stuff that just generates from basic gameplay, like with the dynamo and the momentum system.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that the dynamo's momentum tricks allow them to use their own little short list of abilities.
Pork chop. Joseph Joestar had Hamon, Ripple. Ripple was a breathing technique that gave them the power of the sun to kill vampires. That's cultivation, straight up. That is a cultivation trope.
Mm-hmm. And the stands, I do not consider the stands magic in that Western sense.
I mean, they are absolutely something mystical and supernatural, though.
Yeah, but in terms of what people think of as a spell list, and truth be told, I'm of the opinion that I think that this idea that you have to have a spell list when you have some sort of magic based system, I think that needs to be re-examined. And he says still magic.
I mean, yes, I did say cultivation is just as mystical magical as magic is in the West. It's just that it's not separated out from martial.
That's what I was trying to get at. And I do think that the idea of custom spells or custom techniques or the like is something I think should be examined more often in game design. Because
if the game's concept allows for it, if the core concept is something that will benefit from it, we never ever want to. Just as we never ever want anybody to design by gospel, doing it just for tradition's sake, we also never want to design by pressure either. We don't want people to be told, yeah, you need to do this because so many people are doing it the other way, and design in spite of gospel.
Well, an example I've often given is look at the way sorcerers are described.
Free mages?
Yeah, why do sorcerers have a spell list?
Because that's just like the knowledge imparted to you by your magical blood, man. I am a... Stands are stands. Stands are not magic in the same way magic is magic. Mm-hmm. Stands are psychic emanations and evocations of a person.
Which is why they can vary in so much range, and also why the strength of it is ultimately defined by the strength of personality or strength of will that a character has.
Except when it comes to except when it comes to Kujo, Jotaro, and Dio, but that's just because of the Joestar curse.
Mm-hmm.
Fucking Joestars and their weird ass bloodline.
Yeah, but just as an example, as your stand is the smoking mirror. What the fuck?
Well, the obsidian mirror is another way to say it, but well, I know why El Jaguar is manifesting that, because Tezcatlipoca's counterpart was the Jaguar monk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I just had to, but because, or would I be Tezcatlipoca's stand instead? If so, he got the short end of the stick.
I am not going to entertain whether he's the stand of a god or the god is his stand at this point.
We're not doing the dreaming of the butterfly conundrum. But since an example of this whole why should a spell list be there? Let's look at, say, the bending styles in Avatar.
Now, there's no real spells there. They're forms, stances.
Forms, stances, styles, and substyles. You can't really look at that as a spell list. because I have seen attempts to treat it as such. The problem is you end up just replicating what was in the show, and that's something that we've talked about as not being enough. Even though say airbending is based on Bagua Zhang,
Mm-hmm.
the principle of airbending does not necessarily mean that every airbender is using that particular fighting style. And hell, we saw that in the show because most earthbenders were built around Hungar, except Toph, who was built around Southern Praying Mantis,
Mm-hmm.
which well definitely makes sense. A lot of, unless I'm mistaken, a lot of Southern kung fu styles were built around the fact that people in South China were a bit shorter.
Maybe I would have to look it up.
You know, because you don't see a whole lot of reaching moves in a lot of Southern styles, from at least from what I've been able to see.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. Keep in mind there's hundreds upon hundreds of styles of kung fu, so but this and it's for that reason that try that whenever you try and force a spell list on that kind of thing, it ends up not working because you end up with a bunch of exceptions. And I know I brought up Sanderson, but consider how he has a bunch of different angles for let's use the magic system that he has in for the Knights Radiant in the Stormlight Archive. How he's even though he hasn't outright said it, he's kind of leaning into wuxia with the whole thing of breathing in stormlight to fuel your powers.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's not outright saying it, but how is that any different from qigong?
I mean, Qigong's a little different, but we won't get into that.
I know it is, but it's in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember we ended up having that discussion when talking about how ridiculous that one guy was acting when he claimed that the breathing techniques in Demon Slayer didn't make sense.
Yes.
But this idea of not this idea of the caster needing to be the weak one in robes. There's one other case in point that really that really showcases Brian. I would rather hold off on any spoilers for something that's ongoing like the Stormlight Archive. Especially since the third especially since there's some bits of catching up I have to do, mostly because I'm waiting for the graphic audio versions. But I've mentioned before one of my favorite anime is Sorceress Stabber Orphan, and that applies to both the original and the remake essentially. And you look at Orphan as a mage, as a sorcerer, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
Putting aside the fact that in universe stabbers are magic assassins essentially, and they don't, and in the remake they don't even try and hide that fact because you have them doing as much martial training as they do spell casting, and even having something that is a outfit that is. Tell me you're a ninja. Tell me you're trying to be a ninja without telling me you're trying to be a ninja.
Ninja.
But even whether the original or the remake, which is closer to the light novels, you look at the way someone like Orphan fights, and it isn't doing the typical approach to casting. Yes, there are certain big fuck off spells that he has, such as Sword of Light, but it's just as much getting into fisticuffs as anything else. Plus, how else is he going to bully Vulcan and Dorton because they won't pay him his damn money? I mean, though to be fair, Vulcan kind of opens himself up to that because he doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut.
Yep.
But and of course on the image that everybody's been seeing for the last couple hours, we have Lena Inverse, who definitely does not fit the typical role that people would assume a spellcaster would if they had only known about spellcasting in more Western materials. And I see Nephenor in the chat. I would have thought he'd been wiped, but let's also consider, and this is something I've had to hammer home whenever I run L5R with people, the concept of the wizard locked away in his dusty tome, his dusty ass tower with all his tomes and scrolls and all that. And by the way, Abraham, I do recommend the remake because, as I said, it is closer to the light novels. But do not go in expecting you're going to see exactly what you saw in that '97 anime. You're dealing with a Brotherhood situation. But I often have to hammer home that Shugenja are not doing the closed-off wizard thing. In fact, most Shugenjas are more akin to priests in terms of the position that they have in proper society. All of the major samurai clans have a Shugenja school. Some of them have more. You have the fact that their magic itself is more about talking to the kami rather than just shouting phenomenal cosmic power.
Yep.
And of course, there's also some of the casting archetypes we see in Tenra. I'd say the closest thing to the traditional caster in Tenra is Onmyoji.
Closest, yeah. Onmyoji would be the closest.
And it doesn't do that directly. It makes Shikigami that do the spell instead.
Among other things, yeah. The Onmyoji technically deal in it might as well be a Japanese version of Taoist magic. Because in Taoism, you use yin and yang and the taiji, and well, that's how you do it.
Mm-hmm. Of course, there's the newer forms of Onmyoji who just use those abacuses.
Calculating the world to fuck you over one beat at a time.
Mm-hmm. And I guess you could say the butterfly dream that the Kugutsu do could be in that sense.
There's a lot of things that are very magic-like amongst Tenra classes, Monk.
And we say classes, but this is again one of those cases where there's archetypes, but not really strict classes in that sense. And the key thing once again is having a defined world with a defined set of rules. You and I are going to be in that actual play for Sword World in 2 weeks. Even though we've already made all our characters, and
in Raxia, the world of Raxia.
And let's consider the different types of casters, as well as the casting adjacents.
Yep. We've got all of the wizard type classes, as they're called, which are all of the primary casters, and they are all major classes.
Yeah. Each of them has a different style of magic that they're associated with, and and each of them work differently. This isn't a case where wizards and priests are using the same magic set of rules, even though they're supposedly different types of magic.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at the two basics: the sorcerer and the spiritualist.
The conjurer.
Yeah, the
yes.
conjurer. Sorcerers have true speech magic. Conjurers have spiritualism.
Yep. Now, true speech magic is ostensibly more offensive based, and conjurer's spiritualism is more control based in a lot of different ways. But that's not to say neither doesn't have utility like spells either, or in the case of spiritualism, offensive spells.
Yeah. And of course,
conjurers also deal with controlling a construct, whether that's the doll or whether they eventually go into golems or undead. That is conjurer's bailiwick.
Yeah. Druids have nature magic, and a lot of the shape-shifting stuff you think a druid can do, that's not really a thing for them.
That's a racial. Yeah.
They are strictly the power of nature in spell form.
Yep. They invoke aspects of nature. I mean, one of the early spells we were talking about last night is essentially a stink bomb that lowers accuracy and evasion on a target, using the spirit of a specific type of bog-dwelling plant.
Yeah. Fairy tamers have contracts with elemental fairies and spend their MP to have the fairy do a service.
Yeah.
They're also the widest class in terms of what you can do with him.
Yeah, they have access to 6 elemental fairies, though only 4 at a time with the basic class if we're not using the additional rules from Magus Arts. And they can change which 4 fairies they're going to work with at the beginning of each day. They also have basic fairy spells that they can use that don't really matter on any fairy. So they have 7 different spell lists to pull from, but each spell list only gets 1 spell per level. So they technically have 7 spells per level, which is the highest amount out of any of the casting classes, but it's still somewhat limited. You really only have access to 5 at any one time, and it's still going to make for a very versatile caster.
Yeah. And he says spiritualist, deedlit type.
Lodos War was more Sword World 1.0. Yeah. Yes, it did start as a D&D replay, but then eventually was turned into a Sword World thing. But that's Sword World 1.0.
And we don't have as much material from the 1.0 era as we do from the 2.0 era.
Yeah.
Obviously there's the whole thing with priests, but unlike say clerics, the stuff the choice of deity is far more important.
Yeah, priests all get the same generic spell list, but then the god that they choose gives them thematically appropriate spells. It's usually another 4 spells-ish or so. But I made this example last time, and I'm going to make it again with Strasford, God of Railroads. His thematic spells have to do with momentum and motion. I think that should be obvious considering he's the God of Railroads. And the 2 spells I always remember off the top of my head are one of his spells that just allow you to delete a wall of a certain thickness, height, and width, even if it's magical. And another spell that gives you a magical railroad line to fly through the sky with. You just stand on this rail of light and go.
Warlock, which is the one class I didn't let anybody pick the other night, has its own, not only has its own spell list, but its own system of summoning demons.
Yeah, it has probably the highest skill floor of all of the casters, and if he had wanted anyone to play it, it would have had to have been me, since I've been poring over these books for the last month.
Mm-hmm.
I know the rules well enough to play a warlock. Do I want to right now? No. I'd like my brain to rest just a little.
Yeah. And of course, artificers instead of having them just dip into the existing spells, but also item creation. I've never been a fan of artificers in the world's most litigious role-playing game because they don't fulfill the fantasy.
Yep.
The artificer here not only has its magitech, but is the only class that has access to guns.
Yep. Artificers get guns, and artificers can also do some types of item creation through magitech.
Mm-hmm.
But they are also the only one that get access to the bullet spells, which are spells you cast on your bullets.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that. Which makes their spell list slightly larger because of the fact that the bullet spells are also included, but the bullet spells are only about 20% of the spells that an artificer gets.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to some of the ones that are magic adjacent, you have stuff like the alchemist, who is not using MP, but using prima materia in the form of cards.
Yeah, the alchemist uses evocations, and to use those evocations, they have to have a material called evocation cards, which are different types of prima materia that allow them to use those evocations.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike normal wizard type classes, because an alchemist is considered part of the other type classes, their evocation list is much shorter. They get a lot more at each breakpoint. They have a breakpoint at level 1, level 5, and level 10.
Mm-hmm.
And at level 1, they get access to a list of 9 or 10 different evocations, and they have to pick, I think, 1 per level, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. They get a new evocation each level that they can pick from that list. Once they hit 5th level, they can start choosing from the 5th level list as well. Because it's not exactly a wizard type class, they don't just get access to the full list of each level, but it still gives them a great amount of utility and combat power.
Mm-hmm. And of course, there's also the Geomancer, which is an interesting beast in the sense that it is gathering chi to do these random effects.
So, who here other than Monk knows what a luopan is? Because if not, that's fine. A luopan, also known as a Chinese geomantic compass. You've probably seen pictures of it before. A wooden board with a magnetic compass in the middle, surrounded by symbols of the bagua and other things, used to determine the feng shui of a place. The geograph is akin to the same thing here. You set up the geograph in the battlefield. It starts gathering earthly, heavenly, and spiritual chi, and you can then spend earthly chi, heavenly chi, or spiritual chi on a specific geomancy of that type. Once again, you can only learn 1 geomancy per level, and geomancy lists only update 1st, 5th, and 10th level.
Mm-hmm.
That's a bad joke, and you should feel bad, pork chop. Don't encourage him, Abraham. But the chi is spent on these magical effects, and these magical effects can be quite powerful. The only real problem with them, and it's something I would homebrew if I were GMing, Coops! I wish we had the Dave button, Monk.
I
But,
would use it, but my soundboard doesn't work.
But the only like I said, the only real downside to Geomancy, in my opinion, and something I would probably homebrew, is Geomancy hits a random target.
Mm-hmm. And I see Abraham saying, I always wondered that about RPGs. Suddenly, diviners that communicate with the dead can also summon them, which is awesome. Don't get me wrong. It's one of those things that I think is born out of the limited way people see the whole communicating or utilizing the dead as the villainous necromancer kind of thing. As much as people give shit for Diablo 3, I actually appreciate the witch doctor, for instance, or more voodoo leaning affairs where talking with the dead is not seen as this blasphemous thing, but just something that you work with. Especially since keep in mind, necromancy was originally the word for a type of divination.
Well, that's I think that's what Abraham was referring to when he said diviners that communicate with dead can also then summon them. So, if I had to make some guesses, first of all, anything dealing with the dead historically has always been seen as something to avoid by societies, whether that's enforced by a caste system or enforced by a religion. And it was usually these religions and caste systems existed because being around dead things spreads disease. You know, a lot of the religious and social caste rules you see throughout history were made because they didn't know the reason certain things happened, but these rules tended to prevent them from happening. Just like the whole the kosher movements of Judaism were because of the way that things go bad, the way that meats and other foods just can go bad, or that you couldn't really clean shellfish and other quote unquote bottom feeding marine animals easily. And I think that taboo side of dealing with death, combined with a diviner who spoke with the dead and might have invoked this desire to see your dead loved ones again, and combine it with someone who can communicate with someone who could potentially bring them back. But then the taboo side of death comes in, and all of a sudden that becomes a dark thing. You really shouldn't bring back the dead. There's probably a lot of different influences that led to the idea of a necromancer that essentially there's too many different influences to have to consider.
And I know he's saying they should base it in Western geomancy instead. We've talked about this quite a bit. There's an issue with how limited people view fantasy. And I see he's going with the whole poke some holes in the ground. But the other major non-casting affair that I want to talk about from Sword World is the Bard. In a lot of other games, I've questioned why the Bard needs an instrument, because that isn't usually a necessary thing. In Sword World's version of the Bard, because of the way rhythm works, and because it is doubling down on performance, yeah, they do need, not only do they need an instrument, there are certain special instruments just for bards.
There's also pets.
Mm-hmm.
Bards have an interesting system that is much like the momentum system of our dynamo, I think. They play their song to build up rhythm, and that song has a specific effect. And then they can spend rhythm to perform a finale that has a different effect. So you play, you build up, you spend. And that's true. That is true. Abraham did point out that in Mexico they embrace the dead and the skeletons thing.
Yeah,
that's true. There's a high deference for the dead amongst a lot of Hispanic culture.
And I love sugar skulls.
Sugar skulls are nice.
Mhm.
But
Although he had said bread of the dead. That has me curious.
so it's the bard isn't the only one that can have an instrument. Anyone could carry a flute or a lute or anything else. But the in Sword World, the reason the bard is the only one that needs an instrument is because they need it for the rhythm portion of playing their performances.
Mm-hmm.
And then the cool thing about the pets is the pets can help them extend the range of their effects.
And the key thing with all of these is that there is a reason for why each of these work the way that they do in the world of Raxia. The rules for how magic works may have started out as kitchen sink fantasy, but by the time Sword World started to get moving, the world you could not run Sword World in any other setting. You could not run Sword World you could not take Sword World and run it in Dragonlance or run it in run it in the world of Earthdawn. It has evolved to become tailor-made for Raxia. And the thing is that there's a lot of archetypes in Sword World where a certain item can be used by just about anyone, but in terms of getting the most out of it, that is dedicated to a certain class. For instance, anybody can ride a horse or a monobike, which are basically motorcycles. Which is why is that not used more often? But a rider can get the most out of it. And Brian, I see where you're going with that about Pentatonic Wizard or Barbarian War Chanter or the like. You're still thinking in terms of D&D style classes.
The thing with the bard in Sword World, like we've said, every class is more of a skill package than anything.
Mm-hmm.
I can take fighter, or I can take battle dancer, or I can take grappler, or I can take marksman, or I can take sorcerer, or I can take any one of the combat related major and minor classes and add bard to it and still have a really good skill kit.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if we play another campaign later, I'll do a battle dancer bard. That'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, but when it comes to the key thing here is that because of the fact that the world is defined and thus the world's magic is defined,
Mm-hmm.
it means that the role is defined to the point where you can't just have a caster be a omni archetype. Even the only thing that comes close to that omni archetype is, well, and anything once you're past 10th level, but more importantly, deep magic. And the thing about deep magic is developing that is very expensive.
This is true. Porkchop was just poking at the most litigious RPG because
Mm-hmm.
he likes to do that with us.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
Deep magic is a magic. It's a magic list you only get access to if you decide to pick up both sorcerer and conjurer, and thus get access to true speech, spiritualism, and then deep magic.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was going over the deep magic spell list with everybody, well, with you and Lady K last night, deep magic is not some list of uber powerful, these spells are so good, you should do this if you really want to be the best blaster caster ever magic. I'll actually open up that list again I won't go through the huge explanations of each spell, but I will just read off some names and explain a couple of them. So at level 1 in Deep Magic, and the highest level of Deep Magic is whatever the lowest level of the two classes you have is. So if you have a level 2 Sorcerer but only level 1 Conjurer, you only have level 1 Deep Magic. But the only spell that actually does anything that I would consider combat related at level 1 is Balance Weapon. And all it does is cast it basically casts 2 spells for the price of 1. The Blunt Weapon spell from Sorcerer, and the what's the other name of that spell?
Enchant Weapon.
Enhance Weapon? Yeah, Enchant Weapon from Spiritualism. Blunt Weapon makes a weapon work worse. Enchant Weapon makes a weapon work better. It's essentially casting a buff and a debuff at the same time. Mm-hmm. And you get to choose the targets. The other 2 spells in level 1 are an illusion that basically does nothing, and a signature. A magical wizard's signature. That's it.
Yeah.
If we jump up to level 3 gets some really cool modifications to spells from Spiritualism and from Sorcerer, or from True Speech. Mm-hmm. They get an instant golem or an instant undead, which means that they don't last as long, but you have it right then and there when you need it. And they have Remote Key, which is lock and unlock in one spell. And so you see that a lot of these are more utility magic than anything. Sure, when you start getting up to high levels, such as level 9, you get 3-shot lightning. Or level 12, you get free flight. Level 13, you get Death Ray. But these are extremely high levels. You'd have to be at level 13 in both Sorcerer and Conjurer to get Death Ray. That means you'd have had to focus on Sorcerer and Conjurer as your classes for a long time.
And both of those are major classes, so they're going to take a lot of XP.
Yep. Grappler Bard. He grapples you and sings really loud in your ears. Well, the class is called Grappler, but think of it more as punchy, kicky, throwy guy. There's a lot of punching, a lot of kicking, and a lot of throwing. There's also biting if you have the fangs for it.
It's important to also note that throw is not treated as its own little subsystem when it comes to grapples and the like. No, that's just a different kind of weapon.
Yeah, there's a thing called wrestling weapons, and the 3 basic wrestling weapons are punch, kick, and throw. So throw is treated as a weapon attack. Mm-hmm. Useful, actually, to make throw, well, useful.
And the reason for those 3 is the chain attack that Grappler gets right out of the gate.
Yep. So you can punch and kick, or kick and throw. Mm-hmm. And as your chain attack levels up, you can then punch and kick and throw. It goes on and on.
Yeah.
But the deep magic is more this idea that you're mastering 2 different types of magic already, and this third magic kind of arises from the synergy between them. And it's very, very useful in a lot of different ways, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is a combat type magic. There are some combat spells, but a lot of the magic I've seen in there is more utility based.
Mm-hmm. And the overall thing is that it is possible to make fighters. I want to address one final thing, and this is the reason, and this is a very good example of the issue. So suppose for instance, somebody's a really big fan of Pirates of the Caribbean, and especially liking a lot of these sword fights and wanting to do their own little XP of say Will Turner or Jack Sparrow.
Mm.
And you see all of the you look at the fight scenes in that, and I'm not going to go into the realism of the fight scenes. That's not a conversation that's relevant to this. But you look at the way that's kind of set up. You know, advancing, parrying, riposting, all of the stuff that we learned in fencing class.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to the actual gameplay of a given game, and all of that is summarized as basic attack, or basic attack with a modifier, or basic attack with numbers go up. But it's still a basic attack. And then they look at the casting classes, and you see them do one spell, then do a different spell, then do a third different spell, then do a fourth different spell over the course of just a single session, if not a campaign. You know, a veritable Swiss Army knife of different effects. And I'm supposed to believe that this discrepancy is perfectly balanced. That there is nothing wrong with the fact that one person is doing the same kind of role and the same kind of effects every single time, while another person is doing a bunch of different utility stuff and participating in direct combat. And whenever this kind of thing is brought up, that same phrase is used. Fighters aren't supposed to be powerful. If people are going to do this whole thing of, oh, play your way, you can't have that both ways.
Yep.
I have been of the opinion for the last 9 years, and I've held this true, that I do want people to play games in their own way. And in the same vein, I don't tell people that there's a certain way that things are supposed to be done. And there is the key difference. We want as many people to play as many different games, and the ones that fit them, and have everybody be able to utilize a variety of options within relative reason. I'm not saying everybody go play GURPS. I don't even recommend GURPS to most people I bring in. It's not saying I don't like GURPS. It's just GURPS is a very specific affair.
Very specific affair for a very specific set of people.
Mm-hmm.
The way I always phrase it, the way I've always phrased it with us, is getting anyone who is not a bad actor into the hobby, playing whatever game suits them best. And that's why we want them to play as many games as possible so they can find that game. No need to focus or settle for the most litigious and or ubiquitous RPG.
Mm-hmm. And with that said, I think that's as strong as a quota as we will have. So
yep.
I'd like to talk a bit about what we've got going on this week. Tuesday, and I'm not sure if he's going to be doing recording or doing it in live stream, but Abraham, who invaded the chat in the last few hours, we will be talking with him. We'll be talking with him, and it should be an interesting bit of chaos. Hopefully, the universe doesn't try to force us to kick the can down the road further.
Yeah, I was very worried about Abraham, because my first thought when somebody is suddenly incommunicado and doesn't get back to us is not, oh, that guy's an asshole. It's more, what happened to them? Are they okay?
Wednesday, I will be interviewing Richard Kelly on his revised edition of his game Overwar, which is drawing a lot from Tactics Ogre. The full title is Overwar: The Night Comes Down. Thursday, Monarch and I will be returning to the Valley of the Judge, covering Shattered. We're finally getting into the MDS, the multi-die system that it has, since we're getting into the core mechanics. And of course, Friday, you and I will be diving into the magic system of Dames of Astoria.
Yes.
So that should be interesting. Cloister of the Dice will not be happening on the 10th. I'm going to be out of town that day. And I will be doing a few things on the 11th though. The guys behind Demon Ninja actually reached out to me wanting to do something, and of course, I will also be there will be the return of GeekWatch, which let me see what we've got planned for next week. Oh, funny that we brought up JoJo earlier because that's going to be a thing next week.
Oh, fun!
So as Yoshi P would say, please look forward to it. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.